Most people have unresolved trauma from their past that they haven't yet faced. I think that the way the average person lives, because they don't know any better, is a driving force that perpetuates anxiety and depression. Most people spend a lot of time scrolling, feeling inadequate, feeling like they're less than, feeling like they're a failure. They get caught up in the pattern of comparison, and then they wonder why they feel depressed.
I don't even want to be on social media. I don't even want to be on my phone, but yet I'm constantly feeling pulled toward it.
It's so much easier to scroll social media than it is to sit in your own skin, to sit with your own thoughts, to have to look yourself in the mirror.
Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. Today we are joined by an incredible guest, Stephanie. Stephanie is a speaker and a coach who helps people to navigate trauma, addiction, mental health with honesty, compassion, and lived experience. In this episode, Stephanie unpacks her experience with trauma and addiction and actually unpacking her journey around healing. We talk about how childhood trauma shapes your sense of self and also creates patterns within adulthood. We talk about why therapy is actually in itself not enough and what actually helps people to truly feel safe again within their lives. We talk about the role of movement and embodiment in being able to process your trauma, how shame and suppression actually fuels cycles of addiction and disconnection. What does it mean to actually reparent yourself now that you're an adult? Why can healing feel boring and why maybe for you that's actually a good sign? The cost of hustle culture and how you're actually using this as a way to navigate unresolved trauma, as well as how you can help other people and yourself to feel less alone in your mental health journey. This entire episode is just filled with nuggets and one liners and phrases and mantras and information that is going to be insanely helpful for you if you are someone who's looking to better understand mental health, better understand trauma, and better understand what addiction actually looks like for potentially the everyday person within their life. So, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to Ambitious. I am very excited for today's episode because we are joined by the incredible Stephanie, and we are going to be talking about all things mental health and unpacking all the layers underneath that. So, Stephanie, welcome to Ambitious.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this. And we were just, saying, guys, before we pressed record, how much of like a needed conversation this is, because obviously many of us navigate, resistances when it comes to mental health. And I think we truthfully don't have enough people talking about it publicly or maybe as openly or candidly in a way that can help people. So, Stephanie, I wanted to kind of see as a starting point, like, mental health, it seems like, is a growing conversation, which is incredible and obviously is the goal. But I think that that's also because mental health and the issues around people having struggling with mental health is also on the rise. So I'm curious when it comes to the resistances that people are experiencing of, increased depression, increased anxiety, and we're seeing all these numbers skyrocket. What do you kind of attribute that to, or where do you think that comes from?
Yes, I love that we're having this conversation today. I truly do, just because mental health, as you shared, is completely on the rise. And I really think it's because there's more conversation about it and there's access to media and social media where people are actually talking about these things, right? Whereas before,
Mm,
maybe people were struggling behind closed doors and there wasn't so much forwardness in the world. But today there's this forwardness where we're more connected because of social media. So there's kind of like this highlighter on mental health. And it's so much
mm,
more than just this buzzing word that we hear on the internet. But I do believe that now more than ever, especially here the American way, people are working 40 plus hours a week. People are struggling with sleep. People are living off of processed food, right? There's all these things that contribute to our mental health. And I think that the way the average person lives, because they don't know any better, is a driving force that perpetuates anxiety and depression. I think it's
mm.
lifestyle. I think it's stress. I think it's environment. It comes down to those things. And then of course, most people have unresolved trauma from their past that they haven't yet faced. And as a result, it manifests as addiction or anxiety or depression.
Mm. Okay, so I would love to dive into that because I think, obviously lifestyle is a huge factor. If you think about even the way that older generations had it, they were able to go to work, come home, put work away. They weren't thinking about it until the next day, had dinner with their family, all sitting at the same table. And now we're relying on things like, Uber Eats quickly on the go and drive-throughs because you have no time to do anything on top of work, raising a family, and all of these pieces. So, when it comes to lifestyle, what are some of the core elements that you see with even the clients that you work with in your practice and, in your profession? What are some of the lifestyle factors that people might be able to kind of check in on or self-identify with that might be maybe like an underlying culprit of something that's aggravating and kind of inflating their mental health right now?
The biggest thing that we see as a contributing factor is being plugged into the phone around the clock, because people are sitting at the family dinner table trying to enjoy dinner and the phone is beeping, and then they're stopping in the middle of that moment to clear their notifications to respond to that email, right? And so that in itself perpetuates anxiety and stress and maybe even fear. It creates this dysregulation because you're constantly being pulled by
Right.
something. And then also, social media, we know people post everything that they want you to see. And as a result, most people spend a lot of time scrolling, feeling inadequate, feeling like they're less than, feeling like they're a failure. They get caught up in the pattern of comparison, and then they wonder why they feel depressed. And so, what we have found is that if people can have healthy boundaries around their access to social media and technology as a whole, that in itself can help reduce some of the levels of anxiety and depression that one faces. Obviously, there's a bunch of other things that you must incorporate into your day to day to become a well rounded person who is experiencing optimal well being. But that's one easy fix that a person can take to really see a reduction in some of the things that they're struggling with.
It does seem so, and it sounds silly to say, but it does seem so hard to do though. To be
It
able to put
is.
the phone away, right? And it like I wonder, is it because of the dopamine hit that we get, right? We hear this term of the doom scroll in the sense of like, I don't even want to be on social media. I don't even want to be on my phone, but yet I'm constantly feeling pulled toward it. And I'm curious for you, like, what do you think that that's attributed to? Why do we feel, even when we consciously don't want to be on our phone, why are we still feeling this pull to somehow always be on it?
You nailed it. It's the dopamine, right? So every time you go on your phone and you see those notifications, someone liked your post, someone left a comment, there's that little release of dopamine and it's that reward. It feels good to see that. And so
Mm,
naturally, this is a much deeper conversation, but people actually get addicted to the release of the chemicals that are happening in the brain and the body. And so automatically we're drawn to it, no different than we are drawn to certain foods that we know aren't good for us, or those who
mm,
struggle with other forms of addiction, right? Most people will say, I don't want to drink anymore, but there's relief when I drink,
mm.
right? So they do it. Just as I don't want to spend, literally an hour and a half plus on social media. Some people are spending 3, 5 hours on social media every
Yeah.
day, but there's that constant draw to it because of the release that happens. So I think that there's truly an addiction that's taking place.
Mm. And I'm wondering, and I'm not sure, even for my own education, is there an aspect of similar, and to your point, because I know obviously you do a lot of addiction work and are extremely educated in being able to step away from social, does that mean that it also potentially kind of gives us in some way, shape, or form a taste of like truthfully like withdrawal in the sense of like we're getting this dopamine from social. And so when we step back from it, we're feeling this, anxiety, fear, discomfort basically around wanting to go back to it to kind of feel back to baseline again.
100%. And I also think that most people are relying on social media without even realizing that it's filling a void that they have within themselves. It's
Mm,
distracting them from having to face themselves. And it's so much easier to scroll social media than it is to sit in your own skin, to sit with your own thoughts, to have to look yourself in the mirror, so to speak, right? Because then you
mm,
have to face yourself. And that requires a level of accountability, willingness, and vulnerability that most people fear taking. And so I think that social media is a perfect way for people to put a band aid on whatever it is that they're really avoiding. Now, yes, of course, in some cases, social media can be used for inspiration and things like that. I'm not saying all people on
yeah.
social media are filling a void, but I do think that there is this subconscious thing that happens that is just this easy way to scroll. And next thing you know, hours go by and you
Yeah.
don't have to face the thing that you wanted to face. And maybe facing the one thing is like finally applying to college, picking up the phone and calling somebody. Maybe it's not this big trauma, but maybe it's just keeping you in the pattern of procrastination from pursuing the things that you want to
Mm,
pursue in life, which is
mm,
something subconscious.
right. And I'm wondering that practice of avoidance, whatever that thing is, it could be the avoidance of doing the laundry, it could be the avoidance of doing, as you said, like applying for school, whatever that thing may be. How does that type of practice of avoidance kind of contribute or potentially play a role within things like depression or anxiety? Because sometimes, even for myself, I've felt when I've been at low periods that I'd be on social media and I would leave it feeling worse. Like,
Mm.
you would go thinking, I'm going to go scroll my phone to feel something that's, scroll, as you said, something inspirational or something that's motivational. But then as soon as you put the phone down, you kind of feel like this low point, like you wouldn't necessarily feel charged after consuming it. So I'm wondering, is there also a tie in your opinion, or do you think that there's a connection between the consumption that's potentially making someone who might have a baseline of any kind of level of depression or anxiety even potentially worse?
Absolutely. I mean, just being on the screen, just the screen aspect and the light, that in itself we know isn't good for the brain long term, right? Like it's one thing to check that email and respond or to do a quick Instagram scroll, but to be on it, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, it's going to naturally lower your mood. And
Mm,
also, again, I think that we are receiving information literally all day. You can't get through the day without receiving information, whether it's your
yeah.
phone's ringing and you pick up the call, you're standing in the checkout line at the grocery store and there's magazines with titles everywhere. You're on social media, you're at work, like there's constant information. And so the way I look at it is imagine if your body almost is like this can and stuff is being shoved in it all day. If we don't intentionally pause to empty the can to create space, then naturally it's going to spill over. It's going to feel
Mm.
really heavy. Right. And then imagine if you're like actually walking through life carrying a can that hasn't been emptied. Like, at what
Yeah.
point are you going to be like, I need to empty this can? Like, this is
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, the same is true for our brain and body. We have to create that pause, that space, and take care of ourselves. That self care aspect is so, so important.
So for someone who's listening and they think, okay, like I feel like I have the mindset, I have the perspective of I'd like to be on my phone less, but yet I find myself time and time again being on it nonstop. Any recommendations or maybe insights as to maybe why, even though they have the intention, they're not doing it?
Well, I think that we stay in what we know. We're very habitual, we're very habitual. And so when something has been familiar to us, we naturally stay in it because now it's a habit. It's happening automatically. Most people, myself included, all end up on Instagram. And I'm like, how did I even just have on Instagram? Like, I was just
The rabbit
walking from the
hole.
hallway to
Yeah.
the kitchen. Like,
Yeah.
why am I on Instagram? Right. So,
Yeah.
in other words, it's happening automatically. I think that if we really want to create change in our life on social media, outside of social media, it doesn't matter what area of your life, it requires a certain level of awareness, which means you must be paying attention moment to moment. And when you find yourself going to do that very thing you don't want to do, you have to stop and correct yourself in the moment.
Mm,
Right. So, for example, let's say you want to spend less time on social media and you are walking from the hallway to the kitchen and you find yourself automatically going on it. The moment you become aware that you're on social media, stop. Don't continue scrolling. Correct the behavior in the moment because
mm,
that's how you're going to correct that new way of being or create that new way of being.
mm,
Right. You can't keep doing the same thing. And then at the end of the day, being like, oh, I wish I had this new way of being. Change has to happen in the moment you're doing the thing that you want to change.
mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Tune in, notice it, name the fact like, okay, I'm on my Instagram, great, and then move. Take
Exactly.
action immediately. Okay.
Exactly.
You mentioned something earlier, which I'm really excited to dive into because I like had like ding, ding, ding in my head as you said it, which was sometimes we're on and we're distracting with things, whether it's social media, something else in our lives, because we're really avoiding doing some level of work. Now, that
Mm,
obviously can be something small, like as I said, doing the laundry or applying for school or a small task that you're avoiding. But for me, when you said that, I instantly went to something deeper, which was avoiding something that I know is brewing inside of me, a thought I'm having, a fear I'm having, something I'm ruminating on, or potentially a trauma in the sense of something
mm,
that's, occurred, that's happened in your life. And it's interesting because, for me, for business, we've hosted retreats, and the retreats are kind of half personal development and half business oriented. But it was really interesting because when we put people in a space and kind of create and set a container where there wasn't distractions and they had to just be with themselves in the sense of in silence or just around other people, but not constantly distracted or stimulated, that alone with no prompt brought up a lot for a lot of
mm,
people because they had never been in a setting or in an environment where they weren't stimulated and distracted. And so I'm curious for you, when you kind of nodded obviously to the fact that sometimes people are avoiding being in tune with themselves, what might be some areas that someone could be avoiding if they're not comfortable really sitting in that lack of stimulation?
Yeah, well, this to me, this question brings me right away to a trauma response of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so, someone who has unresolved trauma in their life, understanding trauma is not always what happened to us. Sometimes it's what didn't happen for us. And it's the narrative that one has, right? The perception that one has as a result of what happened or what didn't happen. So, I want to start by clarifying what trauma is, right? Because, like, I think sometimes, as you said before we hit record, people think trauma has to be
Yes.
this huge injury or this huge event, and we discount our emotional needs. And when our emotional needs haven't been met, whether as a child, an adolescent, an infant, or even as an adult, it creates trauma because we start to
Mm,
develop this narrative that I'm not good enough, my needs aren't important, so on and so forth. And so naturally, we will fall into a trauma response. It's an automatic thing that happens. And so someone who has unmet needs and unresolved trauma, they likely have a freeze response or they could have a freeze response. And what that means is someone in a freeze response will struggle with decision making. They'll be stuck in the patterns of procrastination. They will spend countless hours on social media. They will binge watch TV. They will avoid doing the laundry. They will struggle with the simple task. It's not because they don't want to do these things. In fact, they want to do these things, but their body won't allow them to. It's almost as if they're stuck energetically, right? And so I think that that's really what blocks people is that there's something happening in the brain and the body, almost like it's created a traffic jam, and now we can't get around it to do the
mm,
things that we want to do or do the things that we need to do or that we desire to do. So we have to identify what are those things and then process through them, work through them so that we can take that first step and follow through.
mm. Okay, so that's the freeze. What do we see when it comes to behavior that you typically see around the flight aspect?
Flight is flee, run, right? So avoid. Typically, a person in a flight response, this might be the person who goes, 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 works, 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 never ever slows down. It's like we're laying in bed and we're still checking email. It's like, slow down. Like
I was like, I
give
feel a
yourself a
little
break.
triggered right now. I think
Yeah.
that there's some of those identify with me. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I'm speaking totally to myself, which is why it's
Yeah.
so easy for me to talk about this because I've lived it. This
Right.
was once me in so many ways, but flight is really about avoiding. It's so much easier to stay constantly busy than it is to be still because
Mm,
being still brings up stuff. Whether like just like you said, thoughts, emotions, fears, realities, insecurities, whatever it might be. So that person would rather just go, go, go than have to take the chance of sitting with themselves. It's not safe. It doesn't feel safe to sit
mm.
with self.
I
So that
definitely
would be
resonate
flight.
with that for sure. Because I think that there was a point, even where people in my circle, I had kind of put it over the cloak of like, I'm just being productive and I do more than most people and I'm a high performer and like all of
Yes.
these labels that would allow me, frankly, if I'm being direct, to hide in it. And so this past year, I had left like an engagement in an 8-year relationship. And so it was interesting when it happened. I immediately dove into work. And I was, "Okay, great. Go, go, go." And it was just like I got stuff to get done, and so many people around me, even someone who I have as a peer who's a trauma-informed coach who works with people in trauma day in, day out, was like, "Hey, this what you think is high performer, being productive, go, 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 high achiever, quote unquote ambitious is not what you think it is. You're really hiding." And I think we need to take some space to have a moment of just complete stillness in the sense of like tuning into yourself in whatever way feels, to your point, safe. Because if you don't, it's really just delaying the inevitable. It's coming. That feeling that you're going to experience is going to happen. It's just more a matter of when. And so to your point of feeling safe, that was exactly how I felt. I didn't know when I would cry or when I would have this very intense, almost, to be honest, scary level of emotion come up, I
Mm,
didn't know or feel that I was in a space to be able to process it. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this overwhelming, extremely uncomfortable, terrifying, feels like I don't feel comfortable in my own skin feeling? It was so overwhelming that only when I worked did that really push that all away. And so, to your point of feeling safe, because I know obviously people talk a lot about, I don't feel safe to process, I don't feel safe to feel. when you say people don't feel safe, what are some things someone might feel that kind of are a sign that they may not feel safe to feel?
Yeah, I think it's when someone finds themselves avoiding, right, by being on the go, numbing, using sex, drugs, gambling, porn, shopping, social media, food, right, to not have to feel.
Mhm.
That would be a sign that someone doesn't feel safe. They have developed an unhealthy way of coping. That coping makes sense, but it is unhealthy and it can become problematic down the road. I think that if people find themselves constantly in relationships, so avoiding being alone because you're in one relationship to the next, or if you're that person who, again, you're always on the go, even down to like you're sitting on the couch, but let me text somebody. You can't even just sit
Mm,
there and watch TV. Let me just text, or this is a good time to FaceTime someone. It's like, but is it really a good time to face someone? Or are you just
mm.
keeping yourself so busy because you
The
don't know how to just be
multitasker.
still?
Yeah.
You feel attacked, you said?
The multitasker, the
Oh, the
multitasker.
multitasker. I
I'm
thought you
just
said you feel like,
multitasking. And you're like, "Are you or are you just not being
well,
present?" Yeah.
right. Or you're not being
Yeah.
present. And for most of us, if we're honest with each other, it's that we're not being present. And I think it's because we've never learned what it means to be present. No one ever taught us that the only time we have is now. No one. We
Mm.
have been so conditioned to think about the future, worry about the future, plan for the future. And we've witnessed people in our life, sometimes our parents, our caregivers, our siblings, our closest people have modeled to us that they're still talking about what happened in the past. And so
Yes.
as a result, we have lived with one foot in yesterday and one foot in tomorrow, robbing ourselves
Mm.
of the only time we have. And then we wonder why we don't feel safe. Well, how can we feel safe if we're reliving the painful memories of yesterday and worrying about the worst possible thing that could happen that hasn't actually happened yet?
Yeah.
And then we're like,
It
I
all
don't feel
comes together
safe,
now. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what I have learned, and I have overcome so much, and I'm still overcoming so much of my own trauma, what I have learned is that when I can safely guide myself back to where my feet are and notice what is happening around me, the true environment that I'm in right now,
Mm.
right? And be aware with all of my senses, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I taste? What do I feel, right? Then I can feel safe. Little by little, I can find safety because my environment is actually safe, right? So
Mm.
unless you're actually in a situation that is not safe, it doesn't make sense not to feel safe. But our body doesn't know the difference between that past trauma and now. We have to teach our body that we are safe now.
Mm.
We
And
have to
in that, I'm
teach it.
curious, how does the trauma network come into this? In the sense of, I had somebody who was very close to me who experienced a trauma when they were younger, and something like a smell
Mm,
instantly activated all of the emotions of that trauma that they had experienced. And the context of the trauma, to your point earlier, and I think it's important as I really just want to reiterate it for everybody, this was not a one-time catastrophic event. Like, I think so many people think of trauma to be something like going to war or, for example, a intense assault that happens to somebody. That's it's this one critical event that everything is stemmed to, but this was really
mm,
a childhood parent dynamic that has just forever sat with this individual. So, I'm curious, like, for them, when they were trying to kind of, again, process and go through things that this came up. When it comes to the trauma network, it got activated in them. Can you maybe explain what the trauma network is for anyone who's not familiar? And then also, how
sure.
does the trauma network potentially play a role in us continuing to experience trauma, even as we
Yeah.
go on and we live our lives?
Sure. So, a very simple way for everyone to understand this is imagine every single experience that you live, good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter what the experience is, it creates emotion. Every experience creates emotion. Emotion is nothing more than information. And that information lives in the body, it's stored in the body. And so, maybe you are struggling with constant headaches. Maybe you are the person who constantly has tension in your shoulders, your lower back, your hips. That's old information that's stuck in the body from some memory, right?
Mm,
And so what happens is the brain makes these associations and that information stays there. And so to your point, let's say someone had a traumatic memory at 9 years of age, and now fast forward and they're 25 or 35, and one thing happens, and all of a sudden they can smell what happened at 9. It could have even been, let's use this as an example, a candle spilt over and their mom yelled at them.
mm,
They got in trouble because they possibly almost started a fire or wax ruined the carpet. right? And now they're 35 years old. And what happens? A candle tips over. They're not really freaking out about the candle that tipped over in this moment. Their body brings them way back to that 9-year-old episode, right?
Mm.
Because of the association that exists. And so I think that it's really important for people to have the awareness that every single memory lives in your body. Trauma is literally stored in your body. And so, again, our job is to have that awareness to know what are the facts of the actual moment you're in right now, right? Are they actually happening now? Is it reality now? Or when something triggers you and you're activated, is it bringing up that old stuff? But you have to be paying attention to identify, is this new stuff or is this old stuff? Right?
And what are some of those feelings that someone feels in that moment? Like if you're work because you obviously you do trauma work, and if someone is feeling like they're trying to create a connection between, okay, is what I'm feeling in this moment part of something totally different, or is this connected to a trauma? What are some of the awarenesses that someone could tune into, to the point of your candle example? If someone has this situation and maybe they haven't connected the dots yet, how does someone connect the dots of their current behavior to something that traces back to potentially a trauma?
Yeah, so a simple technique, we use this all the time. I use it in my own life. We use it with clients. It's very effective. When you find yourself feeling triggered or activated emotionally, if something were to happen now, pause and ask 5 whats. What is coming up in me? Answer it. And then keep peeling the layers, asking what 5 times. Usually, when you ask what 5 times, it'll guide the person to the core of what's really happening for them. More often than not, when we are emotionally activated, it usually really has nothing to do with what's happening now. Sometimes it does, but it's
Mm,
usually bringing us back to a past memory that has not yet been processed or resolved. And so ask
mm.
yourself the 5 whats. Just what's coming up in me? Answer it, then ask that again. What is that about? Answer it, ask what again. Keep doing that 5 times, and it'll usually guide you to what's really happening in that moment for you.
Got it. Okay. And so I'm thinking, for someone listening to this, they're probably thinking, okay, well, if I maybe am someone who knows that I've experienced some trauma when I was younger, or have experienced some trauma of different types of flavors in my life. Obviously, the goal for most people would not wait till a moment when they're triggered, of course, to have to feel that that's the moment we're going to deal with the trauma. So I'm curious, in a preventative nature, in the work that you do, where does someone even start with trying to decide, I want to better understand how trauma is impacting my life? Because I think there's a lot of people who go about the day to day who maybe, again, have no correlation or belief, maybe, that these two things are interconnected.
Mm.
And so, them lacking motivation today, they don't correlate to, again, a trauma response. If they are having a certain behavior that might be a little bit addictive, to your point of whether it's a substance, it could be sex, it could be anything, they're not attributing that to anything trauma. If someone knows that maybe they've had some traumatic events, but they currently are not in a place where they see the connection, what are some things that could kind of help someone to understand the role that maybe past trauma is playing in their current life?
I think that education, I think that taking the time to listen to podcasts, read self help books, right? Gain as much awareness as you possibly can around the topic of healing and self discovery and recovery. You don't have to go overboard, but I think having the education is super important because, again, a lot of people, as you said, they have no idea that now is connected to them, right? People don't know
Mm,
that. So I think that gaining awareness and educating yourself, a lot of times that in itself will create those aha moments. I know for me, that's how my whole journey started. I read a book and I was like, oh my goodness, like this makes sense. I read Untethered
yeah.
Soul by Michael Singer, and it
Mm,
literally sparked something in me where I'm like, I have trauma and I had no idea that that's what I thought I was. This is just the cards I was dealt. This is just who I am.
right.
I'm doomed. This is just what it is. Right. So I think that informing yourself, being informed is very important. And then also, you could do some type of exercise where you write down what are 5 patterns that you have that are getting in your way. Is it perfectionism? Is it procrastination? Do you get defensive? Get that stuff down on paper and then get curious about those patterns. Start to explore, like, where did this come from? Where did I
Mm,
learn perfectionism from? Where did I learn manipulation? Right? How is
mm,
it serving me? Oh, when I manipulate, I feel in control. Interesting. Right? Be
mm,
curious about that. Oh, when I strive for perfectionism, and I come across as the A player in all areas of my life. People are high-fiving me and suddenly I feel worthy. Oh, that's interesting too. So your
Mm.
worth is attached to outside validation, right? Like start to peel the onion that makes up who you are and be very curious about what makes up who you are. Does that make
Well, I
sense?
think that question, yeah, 100%, and I think that question of, like, how is it serving you was an interesting one. It was posed to me because we were talking about problematic or, like, non-supportive behaviors, and I remember when we were in, like, a circle of entrepreneurs, we were talking about trauma with someone who was a trauma coach, and they were talking about, "Well, how is this serving you?" And I remember the circle originally being like, "Well, it's not serving me. It's a bad behavior." And they had
Mm,
started to unpack the fact that you will not continue any behavior or belief system or pattern, to your point, unless at a deeper level, in some way, shape, or form, it is currently serving you. So
right.
I'm curious if you could unpack that, because I know many people think, well, if I'm, say, addicted to something in a certain area, or I'm behaving a certain way, or I'm being defensive, or I'm, wanting to go for perfect, like, of course it's not serving me. It's hindering me in these different ways. But I'm curious how you might guide someone to see, or maybe you could give examples of the ways that even something that is technically on the outside, considering hindering us, actually always has this underlying level of supporting you or serving you in some way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be maintaining it.
Yes, I love that you're asking this because it's so, so powerful. Just as you said, most people are like, of course, this isn't serving me, but it's like, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't do it if it wasn't serving you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to speak about myself here because I think that it's most of us have been here if we're honest with each other. For me, I am recovering from a perfectionist pattern. I once had really bad OCD and it manifested as severe perfectionism that really crippled me in most areas of my life because I was overperforming, over functioning to degrees that exhausted me. And I
Mm.
just thought, this is who I am, right? And it wasn't until an amazing mentor and therapist I realized that every time I show up and I give 150%, and people are acknowledging how good I am, and I'm getting high fived and I'm getting fist pumped, and people are talking about, man, Stephanie crushes it every single time.
Mm.
I realized that that made me feel really good. I felt really good. And then I had to get curious about that. Why do I feel really good? Oh, because I actually believe I'm not good enough. I actually
Mm.
had a very deep rooted subconscious belief that I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate, I'm unworthy. And so every time I performed and I would crush it, and people would acknowledge how good I was at something, suddenly it made me feel what? Good enough, adequate, and worthy.
Mm.
So that pattern made sense. Even though I could tell you this is exhausting me, my cup is beyond empty.
Yeah.
My stress is through the roof. I feel so dysregulated. I look in the mirror, I don't like what I see. I'm not comfortable in my own skin. But what would happen? I'd wake up, I'd get to that plate, I'd swing, I'd hit out of the park just because I was being validated. And so
Mm.
that behavior, although I knew it was exhausting me, it was also serving me. Why did it serve me? Well, it served me because I was gaining the validation that I was unable to give myself,
Mm.
right? That's just one example, but it's no different than people who, let's say you're the person who you're easily triggered and you don't accept feedback well and you get defensive. You have to ask yourself, what's causing you to get defensive? Is there some deep rooted belief? Or do you have a fear of rejection? Like there's
Mm.
something deeper in there. But we have to be willing to dive deep, like really deep to find it because our life experiences block us. We get
Mm.
so guarded. Most of us are so caged because we don't want to experience pain or suffering in any way, right?
Mm.
But we have learned certain responses, and every single response and every single behavior makes sense. But we have to understand the origin in which we learned it and how it's protecting us in some way. Because all behaviors that can be perceived as unhealthy, they're protecting us. They're keeping us
Mm.
feeling safe in some way.
Well, you mentioned the aspect there of trigger, and I'm curious, with a trigger that comes up. So again, someone being defensive, or someone, for example, struggling with perfectionism, or maybe being overanalyzing or constantly future planning and trying to control. In your opinion, do you think there's ever an aspect of that that is just, oh, I, for example, really care about this project that I'm working on and it's not connected to anything deeper? Or in your opinion, do you think a lot of what our triggers are kind of become our map for ourselves, in the sense of that really is like the insight into deeper things that are always going on? Is there always a deeper level, in your opinion? and it can't kind of just be chalked up to, hey, I really care about this project.
No, I do think that there can be moments where it's like, no, I'm just very passionate about this project and I'm
Yeah.
working hard because I just want to smash it because it means so much to me. I think that that's possible. I do.
Mm,
I think that we have to get to a very honest level with ourselves to know what's the motive behind what we're doing. Like, are you really working that hard because it truly is a passion project and it means so much to you? And the meaning is like authentic and genuine? If so, that's incredible. It's incredible. But are you doing something because you're going to gain some validation or you're avoiding something? Like, what's the why behind what you're doing? I think that's very important to ask.
mm. Okay. That makes sense to me because I'm thinking, even for people in business to make this contextual for everybody, I think there's a lot of things that even when someone says to me, I want to make a certain amount of money in business, first question I ask is why. And that's often because the underlying aspect of it when we dove in with one client was the fact that it had everything to do with her family money story about how,
Mm,
you were considered successful only when you made certain amounts of money. And if you didn't achieve that, you weren't considered worthy until you had done it. So she didn't
mhm.
actually care about this number. It was only because if you achieved this, then you were considered in her family to be quote unquote like acceptable or worthy.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's something deeper, right?
Yeah. I'm taking a second out of today's episode to tell you about something really exciting, and it is happening right now. If you are someone who is interested in getting scaling support with your business, if you know that you've been able to get some consistency, you've been able to get some sales happening in your business, but you also know that you have untapped potential. You know that you are the person who's been taking notes on the different frameworks on this podcast, that you're listening to each episode, tuning into the different strategies you need. That is an incredible thing to be doing, but it also is very different to consume information versus to integrate that information. And that is exactly what we do with these types of frameworks that we teach here. And we help you to integrate those in a custom way in your business. Right now, our ITI Accelerator Mastermind doors are open. We have a promotion that is happening for a limited time. And I want to make sure that you, as the person diving into all of the strategy, are not someone to miss this. If you are a business right now that is ready to scale, if you want to potentially 2, 3, 4, 5x your business in the next 6 to 12 months, this is your invitation to do so. ITI Accelerator is a 6-month mastermind specifically designed to help you to do that. It is a combination of all the things that I love about coaching. We've got the modules and the course materials to help you learn the principles of what you need to know to scale and my strategies. We also have the one-on-one coaching, which helps you to customize that and integrate it. We've got the group aspects so you can build a network of women just like yourself. And we have things like a Slack channel that you can contact in between when things come up day to day as they do. If you are somebody who's ready to really step into that next level of growth that you know you have within you and that you know is possible for you in the next 6 months, let this be your reminder. Let this be your invitation to take a step toward that potential that you know you have. So without further ado, let's get back into today's episode. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious because obviously, we talked very briefly about mental health and obviously the rise of how much this is impacting everybody. And I'm curious, how does, for example, an emotional response versus a mental health condition, what are the kind of two, how do they differ? Because I'm thinking in moments where someone, to your point, might just have a moment where they really care about something. You're having a heavy, intense emotional response. Is that different than having, for example, like you're having an anxious moment versus you have anxiety, or you're having a sad episode versus you have depression? I think, in my opinion, I'll speak for myself. I think, at least in my circle or the people that I surround myself with in the entrepreneur space or just in general in life, there's kind of this like constant label culture, I feel like is
Mm,
happening, or a diagnose culture, if you will, of people who really quickly want to say, like, this is the condition that you have. And I think, as someone who's navigating myself, a lot of depression and anxiety, sometimes that label can feel freeing because you finally have an answer to the reason you've been feeling the way you have. But I think there's also the other side, which can sometimes be, is this depression or are you just experiencing feelings? Right. And so I'm
right.
curious, how do you decipher all of that noise that obviously there is a lot of today?
Yes. Well, one, to just normalize that we're humans and we're meant to feel a wide range of emotions. That's one of the many things that make us a human, right? And just to speak to your point, I love that you brought this up because today everybody labels themselves, I'm depressed, I have anxiety. I have bipolar, and people don't even really understand what the actual condition means or what it really looks like. But I just think that we hear these words again, they're almost like buzzwords, and it's like, oh, I'm going to
Mhm.
latch on to that. But it is completely natural and normal to feel sad. It's completely natural and normal to experience anxiety, stress, and fear. It's completely natural and normal to experience up and down in mood. We're not meant to be the same exact mood 24/7. What I have found in my own life is that sometimes you're going to be up here and then you come back here, and sometimes you're even down here, but then you come back here. We all have that baseline. And I think that for me, I don't believe in disorders. I don't believe in any mental health disorder. I think that what the world would tell us is a disorder is a learned response. And so if somebody truly has, let's say they've been diagnosed with major depression disorder,
Mm.
that's what the world would call it. To
Yep.
me, that's major depression response. Again, there's some unresolved stuff that is manifested as depression. That is different than feeling sad because something went wrong today, right? Or you
Mm.
didn't get that opportunity. That doesn't mean you're depressed. That's sadness, and that sadness makes sense. Or maybe even you lost a job, or you lost a big amount of finances, or maybe even lost a loved one. Like that doesn't mean you're depressed. You might be experiencing what feels like depression as a result of grief, but
Mm.
you don't have a long-term depression, right? Are there some people who struggle with depression for a large amount of their life? Yes. And I think that that comes down to unresolved trauma, again, lifestyle. What are you eating? What are you not eating? Are you hydrating every single day? Like there's so many different things, but I don't believe that depression and anxiety and bipolar and even PTSD, I don't believe these things are disorders. I think that these are
Mm.
responses.
So for you, just to clarify for someone listening too, I feel like that's really empowering when I hear that, because I feel like a lot of the time when we hear a label of a disorder, we feel like we've been kind of given this certain badge we have to wear for the rest of our life. And we're like, well, I'm just somebody who's depressed, and that's just going to be
Yes.
the way that I navigate life. Or I'm thinking, even for example, for PTSD, that it would just be something that you just assume is now this ingrained part of you. You just have to forever live with. And this is just who I am. It sort of almost becomes an identity in a way for some people. And when you say response, where does that come from? Like, how does kind of a response? Because I'm assuming obviously most people are thinking, well, I wouldn't choose to be depressed, right? Like, I wouldn't choose to respond this way. So, how do kind of responses for you work, or what's kind of the underbelly of how that gets developed that leads someone, for example, to have maybe, again, depression being a symptom or a reflection of their response to something in their life?
Sure. So like I'll use this as an example. Nobody chooses to wake up and say, "Hey, today's a good day to have type 2 diabetes."
Mm.
But they have made certain choices throughout their life, and as a result they developed a type 2 diabetic response.
Mm.
And if they make a new set of choices, they can change the direction of their condition with a new set of choices. So
Mm.
the same is true for anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of them, in my opinion. No one wakes up and says, "Hey, today's a good day to be an alcoholic. Today's a good day to have depression. Today's a good day to struggle with bipolar." But things have happened in their life, events. They've continued to make certain choices. They continue to eat a certain way. They remain in unhealthy environments or relationships. So all these things compact. And as a result, it develops that response. It manifests as what we would say, oh, that looks like a depressed person. They're unkept, they're disheveled,
Right.
they have low motivation, their appetite is low, it's hard to get out of bed, they're isolated. We cluster that as depression. But really, the
Mm.
question for me is what has happened in your life or what hasn't happened that has caused
Mm.
you to be where you are today? No different than a person with type 2 diabetes. What choices have you made or have you not made that led you here? And what are you willing to do to create a new version? Right?
Right.
What are you willing to do to create a new version? Because for me, if we continue to come from the perspective of disorders, that does not feel good. It feels very disempowering. It feels like
Of
I'm doomed
course.
for life and there's something wrong with me.
Mhm.
But I know if we come from the perspective of a response, it's kind of like, oh, wait a minute. I actually have a say in my life. I actually have space to reclaim power over my
Mm.
condition. I can do something about the way I feel, the way I think, the way I show up. Right? That feels very powerful.
For sure, and I think as you said that, the instant thing that came to mind is I think for you, based off what I'm hearing, you look at mental health disorders or mental health labels as less of a series of symptoms and more of an understanding of their story. Like, basically,
Yes.
when I start to go back into history, of all the things that have happened to you, we start to understand why you're currently presenting the way that you are. It's a byproduct of your story, less of just if you have these symptoms, you are this identity. You truly believe that the kind of identity or disorder or label that someone may have at this moment is really just a compilation of all of these things. So if you're able to then, I'm assuming, dive into those, you can also rewire how the symptoms are presenting.
That's exactly right. We can heal, we can change, we can transform. I believe that strongly for every single person. We all have the ability to heal and transform. In
Mm,
fact, I think that there's this deep innate capacity within every single one of us, but somehow we lost touch with that and we don't know how to get back home to it. And this is where we need mentors, we need guides, we need therapists, we need coaches, we need treatment facilities, right? Like we need
right.
providers, we need help because it just is a roadmap back home to self, to rediscover and reconnect to who you were all along.
Mm.
To who you were all along. It's just that we get lost. We've all been lost. Some of us are still feeling lost. And I think that it's so important to normalize it. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel lost, but it's also your responsibility to find your way. And you have what it takes to find your way.
Well, I'm thinking for someone listening to this, as you said, it's very motivating. It's very empowering. And I think that I just because I know how much noise is out there and how many competing opinions there are. I'm thinking of the person who's maybe felt they've had anxiety their whole life. All I've ever known has been anxiety, or all I've ever known has been depression. And there's a couple different people of different perspectives, right? Some people say, well, like there's just this inherent how you are and your being, and that's just something you kind of have to live with, i.e., people don't change. And obviously in your work, you're in the work of helping people change. So I'm curious in all of the exposure you have to people with, addiction and depression and PTSD and all different types of mental health presentations, what does change look like in your world? Like, have you seen people who've gone their entire life? For example, I'm thinking and I'm picturing on medication for anxiety, on medication for depression, who've just kind of, again, this has been what they've always known. And in this work and in kind of diving into what you're talking about, be able to kind of rewrite that and move forward without those things.
Yes, and it's the best part of what I do every single day. It's literally my why to see those aha moments and see people change. It's literally what keeps me going. I
Mm.
think that when a person has only known something, you only know what you know. And it's not until you know different that you can do different, right? So for the person who might feel like exactly what you said, well, I've had anxiety since I'm 10 years old. Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? Like, I'm not doomed by this. I think that
Yeah.
it's one, just opening your mind to the possibility that it could be different. Open your mind to the possibility that it could be different. Just start to wonder, is it possible that maybe I'm not doomed by anxiety? Do I even really have anxiety? Or have I been told I have anxiety? Or I heard my mom her whole life say she had anxiety. So I just adopted
Mm.
that narrative for myself and I've been carrying it
Yeah.
all these years, right? I think that you have to open yourself up to start to think beyond what you've always known and be curious of a new way of being. That in itself, at least from the work that I do every day, that's
Yeah.
what gets people to have that interest of like, maybe I am going to listen to what he or she has to say. Maybe I will read that book. Maybe I will apply this coping skill. I will try this new thing. I'm just going to trust. And what
Mm.
I have found is that if a person can remain open and trust the process of their journey, somehow it unfolds. And next thing you know, you're like, oh my goodness, I actually don't feel anxious today.
Yeah.
Right. And then again, I don't feel as anxious, or maybe I feel a little bit. And that creates this new momentum. And then people get very curious about this new momentum. And that's what gives the motivation to continue on the path that they're on. And next thing you
Mm.
know, they're 90 days into treatment and they're like, who am I? I look different. I think
Yeah.
different. I feel different. Everything becomes different. And it's not because there was some magic that happened, it's that the person allowed themselves to stay open and trust the process of their journey.
Mm. This is bringing me back to what you said earlier with the idea of almost like the self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Because I'm almost wondering, I'm thinking of the woman who's maybe had anxiety or depression her whole life. And kind of back to that word we were using of identity, it becomes so deeply ingrained as part of who you are. Or to your point, which I can instantly think of situations or people when you mentioned family. Like I've been told that I'm anxious, or I've been told that I'm quote unquote sick with whatever
Mhm.
that area is or that label might be. And I would imagine for the clients that you work with and for anyone listening to this, it's kind of terrifying to think about that being a choice. Like, I'm thinking when you think about, I've had depression my whole life. And so Stephanie's telling me that I could get curious to choose a different identity, but that's the identity I've lived with. That's what other people know me to be, which is depressed and anxious. I only know myself as depressed and anxious. And so I would imagine for people you work with and in the work that you do, there must be some pretty, I would think, serious resistance to I've always known myself to be this way and I've always lived this way. And thinking about adopting another identity where that label is not your definition, I would imagine would be really scary for most people.
Absolutely. I think that most people actually go through a grief process. You grieve who you once knew yourself to be. And
Mm,
it really is grief because it's so familiar. And I think that's what happens to most of us is that we like to be in the familiar because if we can be in the familiar, that means we find comfort. We can
mm,
predict what's going to happen next. And if we can predict what's going to happen next, we usually feel safe and secure, which we all want to feel. So again, it brings us back to safety. And I think
mm.
that this is why people have a hard time shedding old versions of themselves because it's like, well, if I can continue to be anxious and depressed, I usually know what's going to happen next in my life.
Yeah,
But if I step
yeah,
into the unknown,
yeah.
I'm completely out of control. And that's really scary and that's really overwhelming. And I'm here to confirm that, yes, it is scary and it is overwhelming. But isn't it also scary and overwhelming to waste more time holding on to a version of you that so badly wants to change? Like you have to
Mm,
pick your heart in life. Both roads are hard. The hard of staying the same and being sick and suffering and living in stress and depression and anxiety, that's a hard road. I know because I've been there.
mm,
And the road to healing and self-discovery and recovery is also hard. And I know because that's the road I'm on today.
mm,
Right. But this road, it also is so rewarding. And so I think that it comes down to that. Like you have to just decide which hard do you want to face every day?
mm.
Which
Well, I feel
hard
like
do you
so
want to
many
face
so
every
many people
day?
listening to this, even myself included, and to your point of comfort and safety, we know the hard that is living with the identity or living with depression or living with anxiety, for example. If someone is, I would imagine, is listening to this and they're feeling very empowered. I even myself, I'm like, okay, this is amazing. How inspiring it is to be able to take back the reins of your life, of your mental health, of your experience going through every single day. But they're also scared a little bit of what does this mean? Like, if I'm inspired by Stephanie and I'm motivated and I'm activated, what does this mean if I decide I'm going to do something about it? What does that journey, if, to your mention of recovery or going through treatment or going through therapy, what does that process look like? If someone kind of wants to preview what they're saying yes to, they know they want that end destination. They know that they don't want the identity anymore. They know that, depression or anxiety or whatever label, insert, label for yourself has been controlling your life. But they also, again, have only ever known this. What does that path to getting to that place look like typically?
It's going to look different for every single person. I believe strongly that we have to start where we are and we start small.
Mm.
Start where you are and start small because it can be scary and overwhelming. And we don't just heal and change overnight, right? You don't go 15 years of identifying as an anxious person and suddenly you're a calm person.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not really how it works. If you figure
Yeah.
that out, definitely let
I
me
was going to
know.
say, let us know.
Like
Let us know.
call me,
Yeah.
DM me, email me, hit me up something because I'm still trying to figure that out. Like
Yeah.
that's not how it works. I think that it's about realizing that you only have the moment you're in. You only have the moment you're in and making small choices every single moment to the best of your ability, right? So, for example, if let's say you feel anxious or you're stressed about something, rather than continue to feed the thoughts that say, yes, I'm stressed and anxious, can you choose to go on a 5-minute walk instead? Can
Mm.
you pick up a phone and call somebody who you know is really good for your nervous system? Can you stand outside and soak up the sunshine for 5 minutes? Like, what are those small micro moments along the way that you can do? Because those moments are the moments that lead to the big outcomes. Yes, in some cases, people are really struggling and they need therapy and they need treatment, and that's what we're doing at Agape. Like, there's space for that type of work too. But I also think that sometimes it's just having awareness and choosing something that's good for you in the moment, and
Mm.
it can be very small. Small things.
It's the compound of the reaction point to your earlier point, right? The fact that we live in this place of reaction and basically having, to your point with the phone even earlier, having the awareness of the small things, to your point of picking up the phone or going for a walk. I remember I was chatting with somebody who was struggling a lot with really, really intense depressive episode. And it was interesting because their therapist had said, listen, when you feel like you're overwhelmed with emotion, all I want you to do is go for a walk. And it seems so simple, and the person thought like, okay, like this is not going to be the groundbreaking advice that gets me out of this feeling. But they had started to introduce the idea of a pattern interrupt, basically like getting your body and shifting your state to be able to tune in that moment, whether it was jumping jacks, putting your face in a bowl of ice, whether it was going for a walk, whatever. Again, obviously the spectrum of intensity varies, but doing something to kind of choose the state. And I'm curious, for someone who maybe is kind of wanting to have some of those moments to tune in, is it that simple? Is it really truly about just picking a different behavior in the moment and allowing those to compound as a
It
starting point?
really is. It really is. So many clients that I've had the honor and privilege of working with, they're like, I want that white light aha moment. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know that you're going to have that.
right.
Like it's not like this light that beams down on us and it's like, this is your chance to heal. Like it's really not that. It's those small steps. It's
Mm,
choosing something that's better for you as often as possible. I often say, find the ingredients that make the perfect recipe that supports your mind, body, and spirit and repeat it daily. Don't go trying to add new ingredients. If your grandmother gave you the recipe to her famous meatballs, like you're not
yeah,
going to sit there and add new spices. You're like, Grandma
right.
said this is it. It tastes
That's
delicious.
it.
I'm just going to make this for the rest of my life.
Right,
Right. But I
right.
believe that healing can be simple. Recovery can be simple. Changing your life can be simple. It's actually not that hard. Yes. Can it feel hard at times? Of course. But it
Mm,
really is the simple things that you can do every single day. Find what works for you and stick to it.
got it. Okay. And as something I was curious about when it comes to, because I feel like, to your point of all the new ingredients, we're told every day that there's a new way of finding inner healing, right? We're always
Mhm.
encouraged to, like, in this constant personal development journey of understanding ourselves. And there's so many different ways in which people do that. And so I know, obviously a lot of people talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, people talk about CBT, they talk about inner child work, they talk about shadow work, right? There's a lot of these ingredients that are presented to people who are looking for healing. And even for myself, to be honest, I'm on TikTok just the same as the next person, or I'm on Instagram as much as the next person. And you feel like there's just all these modalities that you could be using, and it can feel really overwhelming to know, like, if I'm searching to heal myself or to develop myself this year, where do I start? So I love that you started with the actions that you can control today, in the next hour, in the next week, in your world. And I love that. And you also said that sometimes it does require that deeper work. And so I'm
Yes.
curious, if you dive into that deeper work with people, what might be something that they could investigate or research or consider if they're thinking like, I really feel like there's something deeper here, and they've maybe tried or have started already with some of those more smaller habits?
Yeah, I think that if you're that person who you've tried with the smaller habits and you still find yourself feeling empty, you still feel like you're depressed, you still are self sabotaging. Maybe it's even more serious. You're drinking, you're using drugs, you're self harming, you're struggling with an eating response, right? Like if you're struggling to such a degree where there's real suffering happening every single day, I think that that's your body saying, hey, it's time to seek help and you deserve that help. And the reality is sometimes we need help and it's okay to need help. We're not meant to overcome trauma on our own. You don't have to go through it alone. So I think that you know yourself best. You have
Mm.
to be honest with yourself. Like, is this as simple as, hey, I need to go on a walk versus be on social media today?
Yeah.
Or is it like my eating has changed? I'm losing weight, I'm gaining weight. I find myself in unhealthy relationships. I'm participating in high risk behaviors. That's a different story. And
Mm.
then I would recommend if you're that person struggling, reach out for help, whether it's a therapist or a treatment facility, but take action sooner than later. And I always say take action like your life depends on it, because when you don't take action, time just continues to pass by. And if we don't address the things that we need to address, they will manifest as bigger problems.
Mm. I'm curious because it's come up in connection to that when it comes to healing ourselves and for some healing trauma. Can we do this work alone? Like, I think about the idea of trying to identify your own limiting belief or identify your own trigger. Obviously, for me, I know even in the business space, there's a value in having an outside perspective or outside set of eyes to say, I see this a little bit of a different way. And I'm curious, in your experience, in most healing, is it almost necessary at some point to get an outside perspective because you can't see it the same way? Or Do you think it's possible that people can really heal their own trauma without necessarily having another person there to reframe?
I think it can be both, and I also think it depends on what the person's struggling with.
Mm,
Personally and professionally, I often recommend help.
mm,
I think that there's so much value in an outside perspective because, like you said, when you're in it, you can't always solve it. It doesn't mean you can't solve it.
right.
I think if you really want to, you'll figure it out. But I do believe that there's so much to be said about support. We are hardwired for connection. We are not meant to go through life alone,
Mm,
especially when we're trying to overcome from trauma. And that's why people are trained and certified and skilled to support you.
right.
You know, it's no different if you wanted to get really good at a new language. Like, sure, you can maybe go online and read a book or whatever, but like, wouldn't it be cool to have a teacher?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that be nice?
Well,
And the
I'm
same
thinking
is,
about being in the jar and trying to analyze the jar at the same time. Like, it's a
yeah,
very difficult experience. Again, not to say that, to your point, maybe it's not impossible to do, but I'm just trying to think of all the situations. Like, I remember one of the things that had come up as a response for me was like lack of boundaries and the fact that I was kind of self-sacrificial in many ways, in a way to deal with other deeper things that were happening. And in going through it, starting to kind of tie the connection to not realizing like I needed somebody outside of myself to be able to show me, "Hey, that thing that you think you're doing to help other people is actually not helping other people. That's actually you having no boundaries and self-sacrificing in an effort to get
mhm,
approval." And I'm like, "Oh." And at the time, I had thought it and seen it so totally differently.
yeah.
And so I'm curious because I think so many people think, "Well, I'm gonna deal with it. I'm gonna handle it. I'm gonna, figure this out on my own." And I was just curious about that because I think that there's such an asset to having a second set of eyes to see things that you don't see because again, trying to analyze the jar while you're in it is extremely difficult typically to do.
It is extremely difficult to do. And I will say that from my experience, even personally, not only with clients, there was a time in my life that I was so resistant to help. And I didn't
Mm,
realize until later my resistance to help meant if I got help, that meant I had to change. I would have to be
mm,
accountable and I wasn't ready to step up to the plate in that way. And so I think sometimes when we resist outside help, again, that might indicate something deeper that you're comfortable being who you are and you don't want to have to face yourself and take accountability, right? Maybe it
mm.
feels easier just to keep blaming and you're almost hiding behind not taking help. And so it's going to be different for each person. Our walk looks different, but I do believe that we are all worthy and deserving of healing and recovery and change. And sometimes we need help to get there.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So, Stephanie, you have an amazing book. And I'm thinking today's conversation has nuggets that are all baked into that. And so I'm curious, can you share a little bit if someone's wanting to dive more into this? Obviously, they can go to your website, your socials, and we'll have all those linked in the show notes for you guys. But for your book, can you just give us a quick synopsis of if someone wants to kind of dive into a lot more of what you're saying and get a better, deeper understanding, what they might find in that?
Absolutely. So, Unpack Your Bags. This is my most recent book. It's your self help guide to inner peace. It's 11 chapters specifically written to help the reader identify what is the emotional weight you're carrying from your past. How is it interrupting the present moment, right? How is it blocking you from becoming your best self? And how is it weighing you down? And in the book, I offer 11 very, very easy practical skills that the person can begin applying right away to create positive change in their life. I've taken all of my years of experience, condensed, and I really believe that it has the potential to change your life.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
because
you.
I
Yeah.
think if someone's listening to this, the wheels are turning. And the thing that I believe in anything, whether it's business, personal development, it can be mental health and anything, is like if you have the activator, if you have this awareness as you're listening to this and you're thinking, like, this is what I need. I need to do this work. I need to stop ignoring the signs, stop ignoring the symptoms, and you want to dive in. I wanted to mention that as a resource for everybody because that would help you to start to get the wheels turning on taking some of this, whether you had the big, to her point earlier, the aha moment today, or if you had a little nugget that landed, it can be the insight to say, hey, you know what? I'm taking this as my sign to dive deeper into it. And so I just wanted to mention that for anybody who wants to go deeper. Stephanie, we have an kind of a ritual on Ambitious, which is really a one nugget for the audience, meaning it can be in context to today's topic. So it can be about mental health specifically. But obviously, you are a powerful, ambitious female. And so we're really looking to just share with the audience a nugget of wisdom that you've had along the journey. So, as you've been in this for years and you've been doing this work, if for the person who's listening, who's going for a lot of big things, and I would hazard to guess has pressed play on today's episode because she's probably kind of to the similar story you mentioned earlier, which I so resonate with, of like the go, 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 and kind of like constantly being in the doing and wanting to learn how to start to integrate the things you've shared today. Is there something that you've learned, or a story of something that's happened, or a quote that you've heard that you would want to share with her that maybe could provide some additional insight or aha for her?
Yes, I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned in my journey of healing and self discovery is that within me there is light, and that light can always guide me through the darkest of times. And so for me, I've learned that I have to look within self deeper, deeper, and deeper, and trust the inner wisdom and the light that is me and let it guide me. We have our answers within ourselves.
Mm,
Know
I
what we
love
need.
that. I love it. So empowering. It's so empowering. It's so good. All
We
right,
need more than an
Stephanie.
hour. This was so fun with
I
you.
know, it flew by. It flew by. We'll
It
definitely
really did.
we'll need to come back for a part 2 at some point because there's so much more. I literally, no word of a lie, you guys, I had like 3 pages of note. I was like, I want to dive into inner child. I want to go into all these other areas. So we'll need a part 2. We'll need a separate one. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on. This was so good. And I genuinely feel was like a masterclass in mental health. It was in every aspect of understanding so many layers. It was so good. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to connect with you. I look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, you guys, we will see you on the next episode. And as always, make sure that if you have any thoughts or maybe aha moments, as I said, or nuggets that landed for you, reach out to Stephanie, send her a DM, shoot a DM to me. Obviously, you guys know that we always talk about the fact that there's such massive power in being witnessed in transformation, meaning that if you're having an aha moment, being able to share it with someone helps it to land even deeper. So, really encourage you to shoot her a message, shoot me a message. And with all that being said, guys, we'll see you on next week's episode. So, as always, stay ambitious.